just to remind you, this will be an interactive session, so I wouldn't be speaking all the time as we do at the BU GMC. So it's good that we interact during the discussion and share knowledge amongst ourselves. Now, the key learning objectives of this seminar, Chris mentioned some of them when he discussed about how to write a good essay. But he had a lot of important things to say on generally how to write an essay and couldn't go into details of talking about specific aspects of academic writing. So that is the reason why we are having this session. And of course, an MSc qualification is an academic qualification that requires knowledge on concepts and also requires critical thinking and reasoning. And it is also required that you should be able to write in an academic style, which is very important. If you have very good ideas, you know all the concepts, you can structure your essays properly. If you're unable to write it in an academic manner, then there will be lots of problems in your essay. You may end up having very low marks just because you didn't write in an academic fashion. That is why we take time to do these sessions. I do understand that most of you can write very well. You just need to acquire the academic writing skills. It is expected that you will be able to acquire these skills that are mentioned on this list by the end of this discussion. But you wouldn't acquire academic writing skills simply by joining sessions like this. You have to practice how to do academic writing. You have to learn how to do academic writing while reading articles or other academic materials. That is very important. While you are reading books, you are reading articles, you can see how material has been referenced there, how material has been paraphrased. So by doing that, you learn cumulatively while doing the essays, and that is going to help you when you are doing the final dissertation material. From experience, we realize that students who are unable to actually reference or write in an academic manner properly when they are doing their coursework, when they get to writing the dissertations, it becomes a problem. So it's important to grasp the main writing skills at the moment. That is very, very important. Okay, we are going to begin by discussing about plagiarism. What is plagiarism? Who can tell us what plagiarism is? Anybody?
When you copy something from someone else.
Yes, when you copy something from someone else. Any other ideas?
Yep.
Yes, please.
It's using another person's words without crediting them for that fact.
Okay. Any other contribution? What is plagiarism? Yeah, I think you've mentioned them. When you use ideas or expressions, or you copy material from other sources without actually citing the authors, that is plagiarism. Especially when you have to copy large portions of text without citing the source. That could be considered as a sign of disrespect to the authors. Actually, in academics, that is considered as theft, and this can have implications far beyond your study. For example, there is a German minister. I don't know if any of you heard the story. There's a German minister, Karl Theodor zu Gutenberg, who was stripped of his PhD thesis because he copied large texts from other sources without citing them. This actually cost him, his position as a defense minister. So there could be long-term implications for you if it is realized that probably you do an academic piece of work and you don't actually acknowledge the sources. That means you can, copy somebody's work and present it as yours. So if that is discovered down the line, you can be stripped of your degree. So it is important, to take that into consideration. Now, how can we avoid plagiarism? Any ideas? What are the things that we can do to avoid plagiarism?
Citing within your work and referencing at the end of your work to give credit to those authors.
Yes, correct. We've mentioned some already. And there are ways in which that can be done by carefully taking notes. Of course, people study in different ways. So there isn't one size fits all in how we study. So we have different ways in which we study, and we understand the different methods. So noting and storing reference details is important if you have to use material which you have just read. And it is very difficult at times to actually keep track of, the huge material that we read. We read material from some academic materials from so many different sources. So keeping track of them and taking note of where we got the materials from is absolutely important. And we do that in different ways. For myself, when I'm writing an article or I'm reading material from somewhere, I open files in my PC where I can store some of that material and indicate the source where I got the material from for further references if I have to use it subsequently. Of course, when you are reading an academic material, it is different from reading probably a love letter, or from reading a novel, because you have key themes that you have to note. You have keywords in different disciplines or studies which you have to note. For instance, I think it will be difficult to read a text in disaster management without seeing the word vulnerability. It will be difficult to read a text without seeing, those themes. Early warning systems, resilience. So you can't just read, and move on without understanding what the word actually means. So in most cases, you need to check and find out what does that word, actually mean. And then, of course, if you understand it, then you can rephrase it and then write in your own way. And this is very relevant when we talk about critical thinking, when we are trying to evaluate information and determine how to interpret it in order to make a sound judgment. So it is very important to avoid plagiarism, and we can do it in different ways. We have different ways in which we study. This slide presents different ways in which we can study to avoid plagiarism. But again, it can't be a one size fits all, because we study differently. We understand the different ways in which we study and how we accumulate knowledge. And some people study, by taking notes. Some people, when you write down information, you tend to remember it more quickly. And research has shown that handwriting, you are not actually enhancing your encoding of the material, and therefore your memory of the subject. There are some people who study better by listening to what others say, like maybe in a lecture. Others study by listening to their peers. We call that Buddhist system or group learning. So there are different ways in which we study. Some use the visual approach where you need to actually see information and then you can grasp it. So depending on how you study, how you can, understand information, you have to build on that. But the important thing is that you build on that and ensure that you understand the information. You can summarize it, you can paraphrase it, you can use quotation marks. We are going to discuss briefly more about these different methods or hints which are provided here on which you can use to study in order to ensure that you have a good way of presenting information. Now we have referencing. What is referencing? Why do we need to reference information? What is the importance of reference? Of course, just as I hinted earlier, we do realize that knowledge is developed cumulatively. So it is relevant to acknowledge the contribution from other sources. When writing or you are creating your own piece of work, it is good to indicate where you got the information from. And the sources where you get your information from can actually determine the quality of your work. For instance, if you are writing any information or you're writing an essay on how to write an emergency plan and you don't quote David Alexander, that is a very key source of information which is quite relevant. So just by looking at your references, somebody can evaluate the quality of your work, whether you've quoted key sources of information. And if you've not done that, somebody may have the impression that you did not actually consult the most important sources of information. So in every topic which you have to do in the different CPDs, you realize that the materials that are given to you to consult, some of them, are more relevant than others. So it's relevant for you to quote the key sources of information, and that would indicate to somebody that you've actually consulted the material that is relevant. And in terms of referencing, you are actually acknowledging or respecting others who have made very important contributions to knowledge. And it is relevant because by looking at your references, somebody may want to follow up on them or want to have more in-depth understanding of the work. So that is why it's very important that you don't only reference, but you also have to reference properly. Now, is it everything that you have to reference? Is it everything that you actually need to reference? What is common knowledge? Does common knowledge need citation? What would you say is common knowledge, which you don't necessarily need to reference? For instance, if I say that in the UK, spring is within the months March to May, do I need to put a reference for that?
No.
If I say that summer is from June, to July, does that phrase need referencing?
No.
Okay, now look at these different statements and tell me if they actually need to reference. Floods are amongst Earth's most common and most destructive natural hazards. Does that statement need a reference?
Yes.
With citation?
Yes. It could be a fact that you've just made up. You need the evidence behind that statement. You can't just say that.
Okay, if I say floods are the most common, that flooding is the most common natural hazard in the UK, do you need to put a reference on that with citation?
Yes.
Why? Is that not common knowledge? Does everybody not know that every year it floods in the UK?
If anybody working in disaster management might know that, but general public would not know that, would they?
Okay, well, in this particular case, if you don't actually put a reference, it is actually considered as common knowledge because most people understand that that's what happens.
Okay.
You can put a reference and you may not put it. The point I'm just trying to make is that something that is common knowledge that almost everybody knows, you may not put a reference to that. What about the second statement? Around 2.4 million people live in immediate flood risk areas in England, and the UK spends around 4.4 billion on flood defense. Do you need a reference for that?
You need two references for that.
Any other idea?
Yeah, you would need to reference that one because it's factual.
Yeah, exactly. And what is factual there? What are the things that are factual there that you need to reference?
About how many people live in the immediate flood risk areas and how much they spend.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, this needs referencing because this information has data that was produced at a certain time, and that data can change. Actually, this is from the Environment Agency in 2009. So nowadays you can have more people living in flood areas. So when you reference something like that, somebody will know that, okay, this is when the data was collected. So it absolutely needs data. Developing countries, particularly those in Africa, will be hit hardest by climate-induced disasters. Referencing or no referencing?
Probably not.
Why?
I would argue that's common knowledge. It's a logical conclusion that developing countries are going to be more vulnerable. You can deduce that because by definition, a developing country will have less resources, less assets, less budget.
Correct. Actually, you wouldn't be prosecuted if you don't put any reference on it, because it is common knowledge that the impact of climate change will have more impact in developing countries than other countries in the world. Now look at the next citation. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, most countries around the world implemented quarantine measures. Do you need referencing for that?
Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea, because that might not be true. If there are 198 countries, do we definitely know that 99 of them have implemented quarantine?
Okay, because you see the same in there, most countries around the world implemented quarantine measures. So based on what has been happening, based on the pandemic, we know that this is something most countries did in order to contain the virus. So if there's no reference for that, there isn't much of a problem. Now, an emergency management plan is a coordinated set of protocols for managing an adverse event, whether expected or towards in the future. Whether expected or towards in the future. So do you need references for this? Because, okay, let's just say this is a definition of what an emergency plan is.
Yeah, you would need to reference this.
Reference, because it's a definition. One thing you realize, while doing your ACS reading is that you have so many definitions from different sources, so you need to actually reference them. In most definitions, I think generally across all the disciplines, you wouldn't find one definition of a concept that is universally accepted. You always see different arguments for different definitions. Disasters have devastating impacts on human life, economy, and environment. You need a reference for that.
No.
Sorry?
No.
Yep, because we know the impact of disasters. They kill people, they damage property, they damage the environment, so these are just some examples of things which you might not reference and it wouldn't be a problem. Now, there are different types of in-text references or different types of in-text citations. Generally, you have parenthetical citation, which I know you all know about this. You also have note citation and you have numeric citations. While reading so many articles, you will see these different types of citations. The parenthetical one is the common one where you have the surname of the author and the year of publication put in parentheses. For example, the second, the reference here, Bang et al. 2020. This is just based on an article that was recently accepted for publication. It will be published soon, which we wrote based on the healthcare system in Cameroon. Now, you have note citations where you put footnotes at the bottom of the page, and you use numbers as superscripts to indicate the footnotes. For instance, you have, according to the EMD80, disasters killed 8,733 people in 2016. So you see I've put 1 year. So below the page, now you see an explanation probably of what EMD80 is. By the way, what is EMD80? Who knows? Well, I should mention that the EMD80 is the Emergency Events Database or the International Disaster Database, which is hosted in Belgium in the Center for Research for the Epidemiology of Disasters. Actually, this is a free and fully searchable database that contains around 20,000 data on natural and technological hazards. So if you are doing any research in disaster management and you want to get information, you go to this database, you get information. It has information from 1900 to present. So that's one of the largest disaster management database in the world. If you are reading, you'll see it quoted in so many sources. And the last one is the numeric citation, where you use numbers in the in-text or in the main text, and then the reference list, those numbers now indicate the references that refer to the numbers within the text, which is produced in a systematic order. So for instance, hurricanes can set back development for decades, and then you see 18. When you go to the reference list now, you see this reference Now they're on number 13. So these different ways of in-text citations are normally prescribed, or there are guidelines that will be given for you to use if actually you need to do that. But I think that for you at the BU, what you need is the first and the second. You can put footnotes, using this method. And, I don't think we are going to classify that or consider that as part of the word count for the document. But the first two, those of you who have written articles, some articles will tell you to do numeric citation. So you have to follow the instructions. And there are different in-text citation styles, as you will note here. There are different styles that are commonly used in different disciplines. There are a number of them. The one that is recommended is the Harvard referencing style, which we recommend that you should use during your essays and during the assignments. During the assignments and during your essays and when you'll be writing your dissertation, is the Harvard style that is recommended. We are just going to discuss briefly on this, but this is just to let you know that there are different styles that are used in citing academic information. And those of us who have written articles and those of you who have written articles, all academic articles have guidelines that will tell you the style which you have to use. So you have to conform or comply to the styles. If you don't do that, the article will normally reject, the journal is going to reject your article. So please familiarize yourself with the Harvard style and use it when you are doing your assignments. Now, there are different methods of citing information, which we've discussed earlier. So I wouldn't spend much time on that. There are generally three. You can paraphrase information, you can quote, and you can cite the whole document. We've explained what paraphrasing is before. So it is very important that you paraphrase, because one of the things that lecturers or examiners do when they're writing your essays is to find out if you have actually, if you actually understand the information which you are writing. And that will be based on you paraphrasing the text. If you just copy everything, it may give the impression that you don't actually understand what you are writing. So for example, make sure you fully understand the meaning of the original statement. And in paraphrasing, it's good to change both the structure and the wording. We're going to just discuss briefly how you can do that. So you can change the structure by reading the sections and then writing down in keywords, paraphrase the key points without looking at the original text. So you can compare the paraphrase with the original to check that you have not copied the original structure and have not changed the meaning. So it is very important to act, your own opinion, or use the original, or not to use the original wording of the text. So the whole idea is to express your ideas, and to ensure that you understand what you are doing. In some cases, the paraphrase text may be shorter than the original text, so it doesn't actually matter, providing you are able to show evidence that you've understood what is there. You can also change the wording. You can identify specialized words that you cannot change, because when you are paraphrasing, there are some words that if you change and you don't maintain the words in the appropriate context, it's going to change the entire meaning of what you are paraphrasing. So it is important that you are able to identify the keywords that cannot be changed. For example, look at this text. Which are the words that you think cannot be changed if you were to paraphrase them? Which are the words or phrases that you think if you were to write, you cannot change them?
Well, obviously the stats in there.
Correct.
You can't change.
Yes, you cannot change the stats. If you were to change or to paraphrase this text, there's no way you can change 3.6, to maybe 8.9, and you still use the same author or quote from the same source. So the stats, you don't change them. There are some keywords that you don't change as well. For instance, if you're reading a text, you want to paraphrase a text that has the word response, you can't change it to mitigation, or preparedness. That will be changing the complete, sense of the text. So it is important, to know that this is just an example of this phrase that has been, of this text that has been paraphrased. which are paraphrased, so you can have time to look for it. Another way is quotation. The quotation should be identical to the source document. That is very important. When you are quoting material, the wording has to be exactly the same. In research, in academic research, we use the word verbatim. It should be exactly the same words as were used originally. And of course, what is most important is that you need to indicate the page number. This is a common mistake which we have seen in so many essays and dissertations. We keep saying that when you quote a document, and of course you have to put it in inverted commas, open and close, it is very relevant that you include the page numbers. That is standard academic writing. And I always emphasize this. If you are quoting, it's always important that you do that. For example, there are different ways in which you can quote. Look at this example. At the end, you have Ross 2010, P18. Then you have Ross 2010, and then you have semicolon 18. These are just different ways of citations that, will be given to you. So P is indicating the page number. You can use this. It's the same way. This another method you can use. You can start by emphasizing the author, and then you say Ross, he stated that, and then you put the text that you want to quote in inverted commas, open and close, but it has to be exactly the same. This is another style you can use. You can just use the name of the author, and then at the end you put, the page number. So there are different styles, in which you can use, which you'll find in the BU guidance on academic writing. And then another method is citing the entire document. For example, you can generate reference to the whole, to quote the entire source of the document, where you have the author's name and publication. So you can make reference to an entire document, making a statement that may have an overview of an entire document, and then you quote the names, of the author, the surnames, and the publication. For example, Alexander 2016 examined 18 principles that can be used to judge the quality of emergency plans. You've read the book Alexander, and probably you are writing, an essay on emergency plans, and you want to refer to other authors that have also discussed emergency plans, and you say Alexander discussed 18 principles. Maybe some other person discussed 15, so this is giving an overview of the key theme that you are drawing from the book. Now, the next example also is I'm using examples, of academic materials which you are familiar with. This next one is from the BUGMC book that was edited by the center director, Richard, Introduction to Disaster Management for Military Staff Officers. He actually wrote chapter 2 of that book. So if you were to cite it, this is how you can do it. Chapter 2 of the book on this examines the challenges facing government in developing countries, in developing national disaster management plans, and underlines the role of good governance with strong leadership in developing and successfully implementing a disaster management plan. That statement is an overview of that chapter, which is on, I think, disaster risk reduction in that book. So you can make that statement, and then you quote Gordon 2018, so that gives an overview of that chapter in that book. And then you have the third example also, which is a chapter on a book which we did with Professor Lee Miles on volcanic crisis communication in Cameroon. So I'm just giving examples of different ways in which you can cite entire documents. So in-text citation reporting. There are different ways in which you can report in-text citations, which we've mentioned already. You have central reporting, where in this instance, the emphasis is on the author, and there's a use of reporting words. For example, you see Kimberley 2003 defines mitigation, preparedness, and response and recovery as 4 phases of disaster management. Actually, if you are studying the disaster management cycle and you are looking at the origin of the cycle, you realize that Kimberley did enormous contribution to that. So if you want to focus on the author, then you start with the name. These are 3 examples. According to Blakey, 1994, vulnerability progresses from root causes to dynamic pressures, and interact with a natural hazard to form a disaster. That is actually a factual statement by Professor Blakey, who, by the way, was my external examiner. He's a professor emeritus in natural hazards. He was my external examiner at the University of East Anglia, where I did my PhD. So these are ways in which you can quote when you are emphasizing the author. Now, there's non-central reporting where you are emphasizing the information. For example, tropical cyclones are tracked by satellite, which provide very useful information to weather forecasters. The emphasis here is on the information, and then you give the different sources. You may summarize information from different sources, and then you produce the information, and then now you quote the different authors where you got the information from. So these are those 3 different examples, that I've mentioned, where you can focus on the authors, or you can also focus on the information. And then you can cite maybe 3 or 4 different authors based on a summary of the information which you've provided. So this is another method. Now, there are ways to list sources of information, which is very important. Now, what are the 2 ways in which you can list sources of information? What are the 2 general ways in which you can list sources of information?
References.
1, correct? Number 2?
Bibliography.
Bibliography. In the last discussion which you had with Chris, I think he talked about references and bibliography, but I'm sure some people think that is the same thing, which is not. So you have references and bibliography, and the difference is that in a reference, you list only sources of information that have been cited in the main text. But in bibliography, you can include all the sources of information which you consulted, which are not cited in the main text. But all the information that are cited in the main text must be on the bibliography list. So it's important to understand the differences. Now, we are generous in the BUGMC. We allow you to use either the references or the bibliography, but I always, prefer that you use the references, because when you are reading, you consult a lot of materials, and the best that you select, those that you think can actually inform your AC or academic material, are those you include in the main text. So you include those in the reference list, that will be okay. If you were to include everything in the bibliography, the word count can become too long. So it's your choice. You can decide to use bibliography or references, but make sure that, and when you use references, then you know what you are doing. Okay, don't use bibliography and then write everything that all the sources of information you've consulted without mentioning them in the main text. That is not standard, referencing practice. So please just note the differences between in-text referencing that. Now, there are different, there is a guide on how to reference using the Harvard style, which is the one prescribed by the university, which I wouldn't go into much detail because it's a link which you can consult, but generally, you give the names of the author and the year of publication. And of course, if there are 3 or more, you can use, just the name of the first author and use a tar. For these are some examples which I wouldn't emphasize on, but the link to BU guide for citation and referencing has been provided. Yeah, I think I've provided that, also at the end of this discussion, which I would recommend that you probably download and keep by your site if you are writing essays. Now, whether it's a reference list or a bibliographic list, there are things which you need to consider while doing that. This is important. You have to list all the references that are cited in your text in alphabetic order. There are instances where we've seen students numbering references. That is not the tradition of academic writing. You don't number references to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You only do that if you are doing the referencing by number, as I indicated earlier. But if you are not using that format where you indicate the number in the main text and then indicate the number in the reference list, then you don't need to to write the reference list and number them. So you do them by alphabetic order. If several works by the same author are cited, you should give them in the order of the date, starting with the earliest year. But there are instances where the guidelines in some articles can tell you that, okay, start with the latest, so you can do that. If 2 or more texts from the same author have been published in the same year, they must be distinguished by adding either an A or a B or a C, and so on. Because you can read an article where the author or you can read several articles published in the same year. So how do you distinguish them? So after the year of publication, put A, B, C, D. And then you also put the reference in the reference list accordingly. You have to include all the names of the authors. While in the main text, you can use a tal, in the reference list, you have to include all the names of the authors. There are also instances where students and other academics actually are lazy. They don't want to include all the lists, except you are told to do that, which some journals do in order to save space. All the authors have to be included in the reference list, even if you don't include them in the main text of the academic material. And of course, there are different reference styles, which I've mentioned earlier, which we say you have to use the BU Harvard referencing. And of course, one thing which is also important to note is that while listing references, the way or the style which you have to produce them, the reference lists are different based on the source. For journal articles, it is different. From books, it is different. From reports, it is different. And I've sort of just given you a guide here on the things which you have to consider or how they have to be presented. From web pages, it is different. From newspapers, it is different. This is very important if you want to be very strict on how referencing is done. And of course, the guide will be given to you by the institution. For the BU Harvard style, if you go to the guidance, you are going to see how you are supposed to do this. But the style that I've given here is from the BU Harvard style. For thesis or dissertations, in most cases, you have to reference just PhD thesis, MPhil or Res dissertation, because the belief is that these materials have been obtained through rigorous research. Well, it might not be rigorous, but through research. So they might have done some contribution to knowledge. In the other, academic pieces of work like undergraduate and maybe MSc dissertations, you may not need to reference them. And in most cases, it's not recommended for you to use them. But if you use them, well, if you reference them, you're not going to be prosecuted or have any problems for that. But just know that. And I've mentioned at the end that for more information, you can consult the Harvard style of reference, which is the BU method. Now, let's go to the exercises which I gave to you. Can you please just check the exercises which I gave to you, and let's look at them. I think we have enough time to look at them. I said there's at least one mistake for each reference. So this is the first one which I mentioned. Now, who can tell me the error that is there in that reference?
You don't need to put the first names.
Sorry?
You don't need to put their whole first name. It'd just be like Ban H.
Okay, you mean abbreviate the first names?
Yeah.
Correct. Actually, that is actually the mistake there. You can see in the answer which I provided there, which I've highlighted H and L. So you have to be consistent. In most cases, you have to write the initials of the first name or subsequent names. You only write the first names or the surnames in full. Okay, this is again, something which we note in essays and dissertations from students. Some of them are inconsistent. You write the first names in full, the subsequent names, you abbreviate them. So you have to be consistent. The next one, what is the mistake there?
The year is missing, and World Bank and Washington are the wrong way around.
The year of what? I can see a year, 2018.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes, it's just the World Bank and Washington should be the other way around. Yeah.
World Bank. Well, again, depending on what is prescribed, you can give the town or country where the book was published before, or probably the editor, but that is not actually what is missing. What is actually missing is the page range of the chapter, because this is actually a chapter in a book. That is why you see edited here, which somebody has edited, just like the BU GMC book. So ideally, you should put the page, of the chapter in the book, so you see no page numbers have been given. The reason I gave this exercise in advance is that if you look at the reference, you can have time to go and actually check and find it because they are all genuine references. So you need to indicate the page range of the number. This is important to guide somebody who wants to consult the information further. Now look at the next one from
Henry. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I've understood this. The aid memoir that I'm looking at says that it should be place of publication followed by publisher. So surely that means it should be Washington, World Bank.
Yes, yes. Well, that is correct. It just depends on the guidance through which you have, which you can use that. So that is not wrong. Those are binary details, which are equally very important. I mean, if you write articles and you don't put that order, they will send it back to you, even if it has been accepted, to put it in the right order. So that is important. But again, the order could be changed depending on the guidance that's given to you. So here you have this page number or the page range of the chapter in the book that has not been provided. The next one, is the next one an article or a book? And how do you know that?
It's a book because you haven't got in a journal article, like the journal article is in italic.
Yeah, correct. So what is the error that is here?
The place.
Sorry? What's the mistake here?
The place.
Place of publication. Exactly. See, the place of publication is not provided. And this is published in London, which I've highlighted. So those are minor things that are important to note. The next one, Alexander G, you should be familiar with this now. How to write an emergency plan, United Kingdom. What is missing there?
A publisher?
The publisher, exactly. You see, so that is it. Dunedin Academic, that's the publisher is missing there. So, you need to be able to identify if you consult a book, then you know that you are dealing with a book, and then you understand the style which you have to use to write it in the reference list. That's why I gave that exercise. The next one is the book that was edited by the director of the center, Richard, Introduction to Disaster Management for Military Staff Officers, which you have been given to consult. What do you think is the error there?
You don't need the editor bit.
Editor bit, exactly, correct. You abbreviate it, you don't write it in full, for consistency. Most cases, you have to abbreviate the editor. This is when you are quoting the book generally. Of course, this is a book which he edited, probably with other colleagues, and then we contributed chapters to it. So if we were to refer to the book generally, not to chapters, then you can produce the reference, using this format. Now, the next one is also...
Henry, if we're going for consistency, I mean, again, I had written down that the mistake in the previous one was that it said United Kingdom, whereas in the earlier examples we specify a city. So in terms of consistency, if we're saying if the United Kingdom is the requirement, then for the earlier one, should it not just be USA rather than Washington?
Yep, I mean, you are correct. You are correct. For consistency, you can decide to write, the town and not the country.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is correct. So this next one, what do you think is the mistake here?
Should it say available at the web address at the end?
Well, just don't bother about the web address, because some articles may have the GOI, the electronic link to them, and some might not have. Actually, all articles don't have. It is recommended that you put the web address if you have it. If you don't have it, it's not a problem. But I think the error is from the main citation, itself. Not that I gave this exercise in advance for a reason. Now, if you look now, there's no issue number. This is the volume number, which is 10. There's no issue number for the article. And some articles have issue numbers, some do not add. Some do not have. So please take note. If you check the articles, like this one actually does not have, this article we published does not have an issue number. It's just the volume number. But the other thing you have to note is that, you see, this is 2019, the previous reference 2019, this is also 2019. You understand? So actually, you are supposed to differentiate them, as I mentioned earlier, by using letters like A or B. That's
Henry, what's the difference in an issue number and an article number? I don't understand the difference.
You have a volume number and issue number.
What's the
So
difference?
the volume number is a volume in which the set of articles have been published, and then they are published in different issues within it. So if you look at most articles online, you always see that they have, a volume number and issue number, and you can use the volume number to identify articles that were published maybe on a particular theme, and then you use the issue number to actually identify the articles themselves. So most articles will have a volume number and issue number, but there are other ways in which you can use to identify articles, but it's always recommended that if they have the information which is clearly visible, in the article which you are reading, it's good to use it. So in this second example, I'm just looking at 10 minutes. When multiple references of the same date are given for the same authors, you need to add a lowercase letter to distinguish the reference, as I mentioned earlier. These are two different, you have this reference, the next reference that is coming was published in the same year. You see, like this one is published in 2019. So ideally, you should have included A here, and then this one, the next one will be B. So I've mentioned, the mistake that is here. See above for multiple references of the same date. So this is A and this is B because we're both published in the same year. If you don't do that in the main text and also in the reference list, it will be difficult for you to actually distinguish the articles that were published in the same year. So it's very keen to note, these minor things. And then, of course, what's the mistake in the next one?
Volume and issue number.
Volume and issue number is missing. Okay, clearly. So no volume and issue number. Okay, now, okay, this next one, what is the mistake there? This is the reference list.
You haven't listed all the authors in the reference list.
Correct. You see, he has not listed all the authors in the reference list. So all authors should be listed. So you have added all the authors here, and they are quite long. So in most cases, people, don't want to list all the authors because there are so many of them. Now, let's quickly go through the avoiding plagiarism exercise. This is the exercise that was given to you to read the text that, I took from Alexander's 2005 book. Now, check the following phrases that were based on the above paragraph. Are they plagiarized, or do you think they properly paraphrase or quote the source? Standards should be formulated on the basis of widespread consultation with stakeholders. Do you think they quote the source properly, or they plagiarize the source?
I put plagiarized.
Plagiarized, no reference. Correct. Then the next one. A standard can be formulated based on widespread consultation since dialogue with stakeholders is required. And then you have the reference. Is that plagiarized or not plagiarized?
Not plagiarized.
No proper paraphrasing. If we were to consult, if we were to consult the text, just one or two words probably have been slightly changed. So this quotation is, or citation is very similar to the original text. So the wordings are too close. So you have to be careful to ensure that the wordings are not too close to the original text. The process of formulating a standard should begin with circulating the document that has been consulted that explains the scope and objectives of the standard. Is this written correctly, or is plagiarized?
You're missing the page number.
You're missing the page number because it's a quotation. Okay, so this one, there's no page number. So you are missing the page number because you have inverted commas open and close, which shows that you are quoting. So the page number has to be there. So not a proper quote, no page numbers. What about the next one? The process of formulating a standard should begin with the circulation of consultative documents, blah, blah, blah. Is this done properly or not?
There should be a comma after the year rather than a colon, I think.
Well, actually, it's done. It's a proper quote. It just depends on the consistency. If you decide to use a colon, that is fine. In some cases you can use it. In some cases you can use a comma. As we say, just be consistent. If you decide to use a column, then you use it all through. Don't use a column and the next reference you use a comma. And again, in some academic materials, you are told what to do. If you're writing articles. The next one. Alexander posits that a standard for formulating an emergency plan should be based on widespread consultation, since dialogue with stakeholders is required, and the process can start with the circulation of a consultative document that explains the scope and objective of the standard. Well, I don't think this, now you can read the text, and decide. That is something which you should have done before in order to note if it's correct or not.
I said, go on.
Yeah, so there's no proper paraphrasing here. The wording used is too close to the original text if we were to check the original text. I mean, it doesn't mean that if you change 1 or 2 words, from the original text, you have paraphrased correctly. No, you have to change the structure, of the entire material which you've consulted. And then you change at times the wording. You can use similes, but they should be able to explain the word. So if you just change 1 or 2 words and the structure is the same, it's considered, to be plagiarized, even if you've altered some words and it's too close to the original source. Okay, look at the next one. Alexander 2005 underscores the relevance to engage all stakeholders through extensive discussions when developing standards in emergency management.
Good quote.
I think
Correctly referenced.
Yep. So that is actually a correct paraphrase of it, because the entire structure has been changed by probably the students, but the meaning, remains the same. So both structure and wordings have been changed. So these are just, some examples, which I gave to you to prick your thinking on when to paraphrase and how to write references. And as I said initially, you wouldn't be an expert on academic writing just by listening to sessions like this. You need to practice them. Practice them while reading. One of the ways which you learn most is by reading, because when you're reading articles, you see how they have been done. In mostly academic articles, because they have gone through a very rigorous, process before they are published. So in most cases, there are more credible sources of academic material which you can, learn from them. See how they have been done, see how the referencing list has been done. You learn, from them, and you practice them yourself, especially when you are writing drafts for essays. We can guide you on correcting any mistakes that you have done, so that by the time you get to the stage of doing the dissertation, you don't have any problems. It becomes a problem when you are writing your dissertation, and then, you have to be corrected on how to do referencing. It creates a lot of problems, both for the supervisor and both for yourself. So when you grab the skills after having written so many essays, then it becomes easy. So I've provided, some sources of information which you can consult subsequently. And the first one, of course, which I recommend you to be abreast with, is that from the university, which you are required to follow. I think that's the end of it. Any question?